There's a Sufi allegory that has many dimensions. But let's see what it brings up in us after the telling. It's a story about that king who was proud and arrogant and authoritarian. He ruled over a vast kingdom. He had a large harem. In that harem, there were 3 maidens of marriageable age. So the king called his daughters to him and posed them a statement. I am the greatest king in all the world. I have the power of life and death. I hold your fate in my hands. What say you? And the first daughter said, Oh, great king, yes, you are the greatest monarch ever, and I bow to your will. The king said, Well, I will marry you to my grand vizier. And he turned to the second daughter and said, What say you? And she said, Oh, father, great king, I am in your hands. I obey whatever you say. So the king said, I will marry you to the captain of the guards. And he turned to his third daughter and asked, What say you? And she said, Oh, great king, no doubt you have the power of life and death, but I believe destiny has its own way. Well, the king went into a great rage, and he said, I will marry you to the most unworthy being in all my kingdom. And so he sent off messengers to look for the one who was the most unworthy male in all his domain. When the messengers came back, Fatima, that was the daughter's name, was dressed in a simple cotton shift and led out of the palace to the far reaches of the kingdom. And there was this ramshackle hut, broken down the windows, broken the roof leaking, the doors hanging off their hinges. And there outside the ramshackle hut was one of those old ovens. And it was found that in this hut lived an old widow, and her son lived in the outside oven and never came out, the old woman bringing food to him each day. This was to be her husband. But Fatima seemed to be unperturbed by her fate, and she set to, because being a rather intelligent being, she had to put 3 gold coins down in between her ample breasts before she left the palace. And so she used the gold coins to have the house repaired. The windows, no leaks in the roof, and the doors repaired. And she even got to and made a little garden outside with a little fountain and all. And then one day she said to her mother-in-law, Now, for the next 3 days, you will not give food to my husband. Well, of course, this mother-in-law, having a princess for a daughter-in-law, she could not play the role of the normal mother-in-law, so she had to concede to her daughter-in-law's wishes. And on the second day, they could hear yowling and screaming coming from the outside oven. But Fatima would not let the mother take food out for this man. And on the 3rd day, or the 4th day it would be, Fatima gave instructions that this food was to be put out in the morning when the sun was coming up. And of course, the husband was very, very hungry, and he could do nothing else but follow his hunger and come out of his oven and crawl over to where the food was placed. But he was greatly surprised, because instead of being this ramshackle hut, here was this lovely cottage with curtains at the windows and flowers and a little flower bed, which he noted before he climbed back into his oven. Well, you can get the gist of the story now, how it went on. And so it was that the food was placed closer and closer to the house every day. So the husband would come out and crawl to his food until finally one day the food was on the little doorstep of the house. And when he arrived there, of course, to take his food, the door opened and there was his beautiful wife. Well, we can all imagine what happened left. Instantly, even in his dreadful state, he fell in love instantly with this beautiful being. But instead of being repelled by him, she welcomed him. She guided him into the house, had him to sit down, and even though he was so ashamed in his ragged, filthy state, he could not take his eyes off her beauty and the wonderful house that he was now in. Well, as the story goes, his wife convinced him to go to the baths. So he was taken to the baths and he was cleaned up, scrubbed and polished, his nails cut and so forth. And there appeared this very handsome, personable young man. So the story goes on that the fellow who owned the baths thought he was such a fine-looking fellow, he offered him a job, carrying water for the baths. So he even started to earn a little bit of money, and he sort of started to stand up in his stature and feel a little bit more worthy of his beautiful wife. And so it went on until one day there was a travelling merchant who frequented these baths very often, who came and sort of, because of the service and the politeness of this young man, offered him a job trading. So Yusuf was his name. Yusuf started to work for the merchant and was making a name for himself because he found that he had a way with trading and so forth. So he and his beautiful wife were cohabiting in their little cottage when one day the merchant said to Yusuf, "Yusuf, I'm going on a trading mission and I want you to come with me and learn the ways of trade." So Yusuf was a little bit afraid about this, but he consulted his beautiful wife Fatima, and she said, "Go, what a wonderful opportunity this is." So he accepted the offer of the merchant to go on this caravan with him, a trading mission. But as it happened, when he was coming home from a day with the merchant preparing all the goods that were to be taken on their caravan, he happened to meet a strange-looking fellow on the road. And this fellow said to him, "Give me a coin or two and I will offer you 3 pieces of advice." So Yusuf took out some coins from his robe and he gave them to the being, because this being was in a ragged state and he thought he would just help him whatever the advice was. And this strange young being said to him, "If you enter anywhere, go with your head first. And the second piece of advice is, always sleep on high ground." The third piece of advice was, if you get angry, count to 40 before you take any action. Well, Yusuf took in these 3 pieces of advice and gave the strange-looking being the coins, and then he went back to prepare for his journey on the caravan, the trading trip. So they set out on their trading trip, but they had to cross a great desert. And as they went into the desert, a sandstorm came along and obliterated the path that they were to take. So this band was thirsty and hungry, so it was decided that they would have to dig a well. So they dug and dug very, very deep, and then one of the young people on the caravan was to go down to see if he could tap water. Well, when this young being went down, he disappeared. So they sent down another being, and he disappeared too. And again. So several of the young men on the caravan were gone. So it came to Yusuf, and he remembered before he climbed in to the deep, deep hole that had been dug, the advice that had been given to him: always enter head first. So he instructed that he be lowered down into the hole head first. So when he got to the bottom of the deep cavern that they'd dug, there he saw the bones of the other young men who had been lowered. And to his great surprise, when he looked around, there was this ghoul, demon, fangs dripping with the blood of those who'd gone down before. And Yusuf, although he was feeling very fearful, he said to this ghoul, "Oh, great ghoul, great greetings to you, great one." And the ghoul replied, "Well, since you have been polite to me and greeted me with an honorific, I will not eat you like I did the others. What is it that you seek?" And Yusuf, of course, said, "Well, we've been digging for water." "Oh," said the ghoul, "the water is mine, I keep it blocked. But since you are a personable young man and treated me with honor, I will release the water to you." And the ghoul invited Yusuf to enter his domain. But Yusuf said, thank you, I must return to my caravan." And so Yusuf gave the pull that allowed those left up above to pull him out, and when he did, water came gushing out of the deep well. But strangely, Yusuf did not tell those in the caravan, the merchant and those who were travelling with him, what had transpired, even though they asked him how he did that. So the caravan completed their mission. They went into the different cities to trade their wares, and they set out to return home. Now, on their return, when they were looking for a place to sleep for the night, to make their campfires and have their food and sleep, they found a river, and it was decided that they were going to camp by the river, a very suitable place, they thought. And then Yusuf remembered the second piece of advice. Always sleep on high ground. So Yusuf looked up and there was a ledge up above, and he said, I'm going to sleep up here. I advise you all to come with me. Well, the merchant, recognizing that Yusuf had something quite special about him, said that he would follow Yusuf where he went. But the others in the caravan decided that they found by the river the better place to stay. So Yusuf and the merchant went up to the ledge, climbed up and settled themselves for the night. And in the middle of the night they heard a great roaring sound. And it was the river in flood. It came down and washed away the caravan that had settled by the river. Only Yusuf and the merchant remained safe on the ledge that they had climbed to. Now the merchant was intrigued by this, and he asked Yusuf, how is it that you know or knew these things? And Yusuf did explain to him that he'd met a strange being and been given advice. And so the merchant and Yusuf set off back to their home. Now it so happened that the merchant was a widower. He had no sons, and he'd grown very, very fond of Yusuf. So as they neared their hometown, and they had to settle for the night, they lay down, and in the middle of the night, the merchant woke up screaming. He'd been bitten by a deadly scorpion. Yusuf tended him in his last moments, and the merchant said to Yusuf, I love you as my son. I give you my business and all that I own. And then he passed away. Yusuf, with ritual, buried the merchant out there where they had slept. And then he made his way into town. When he got to his house, he decided that he would surprise his beloved wife. So he crept up to a window to see where she was. And when he looked in, there was his wife in the embrace of a young man. So Yusuf was mad with anger. He loved his princess. But then, still holding the dagger in his hand that he was going to kill them both with, he remembered the last piece of advice. Count to 40 before you react with anger. And as Yusuf was there, his anger still boiling within him, listening at the window, he discovered that the young man in the embrace of his wife was her brother. Her father, the king, had relented, had come down from his place of arrogance and missed his daughter greatly, and sent one of his sons to seek her out. So of course, having counted to 40, when he entered the room and was embraced his beloved wife and was introduced to his brother-in-law, there was a great and rejoicing reunion for them. After this, as we can end the story as we will, Yusuf and Fatima went back to the palace to be reunited with the king and her family. So after such a story as this, it's often asked, what is the deep meaning of this story? But instead of asking the deep meaning of this story today, it's asked of you, what is it that this story has evoked in you? What is it that arises to your awareness of what this story, at this moment in time, means for you? What has it evoked? What is its point? Patience. That's its message. Patience. And all will be well. What has patience got to do with time?
There is no rush.
Because patience is now, isn't it? Patience is now. Patience is not something unfolding. Patience is now. And so we're in that timeless place, aren't we?
But the thing with her is that Fatima, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Fatima had faith in destiny.
Mm-hmm.
And she knew her destiny was good. And she had faith in that. And therefore she had expectations that everything would work out accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore she was able to take each step one at a time, and she knows that each step needs to be taken with certainty and faith that will work out.
So faith was what arose for you.
But without that faith she couldn't have done.
Okay.
I think if that will be done here.
Okay.
So trust in God. It can look really bleak, but you don't know where it leads.
Yes.
There was a lot of compassion in there for me. A lot of compassion.
Compassion.
She had compassion for the beggar person right in the beginning, and then she had compassion for him, and she was forced into that situation.
Yes.
All along.
Mm-hmm. Compassion.
I think she also kind of knew that if you actually help someone, lift themselves up, even if it's against themselves, because there's no way he was going to lift himself up. She had to entice him out and go step by step. But she knew that if you actually help someone lift themselves up, they get to a point where they'll take it from them. You can take it to a certain point, then they'll take over.
And is this true of this situation, if we recognize that every character and every aspect in every story is part of ourselves? Do you think that this is what happens within ourselves, between to these warring factions of the male and female, or subjective and objective? Do you think it works that way too?
True, because sometimes when we hold fast